Orale, vatos! This is Zukadowski of We Are Changed Oregon. When you look at history, you usually see a lot of social unrest when it comes to economic instability. And to talk about that, plus a lot more, we have John Sneisen with us here today. He hasn't been on for a while, but he's an economic historian. We have a lot to get into, especially with the utter insane statement that was recently made by the U.S. Federal Reserve that came out pretty guilty, that came out with their hands in their pockets saying, hey guys, you know all the horrible things that we do when we take the largest transfer of wealth in human history? Well guys, you know, that's not, we don't add to inequality, even though we give all of our money and all of the money that we make up out of thin air and unicorns and all the things that they just create. They give it to their buddies at Blackrock, which, by the way, we're going to be looking into the agreements of the insanity that's happening behind the scenes of this economic facade of this huge transfer of wealth. We also got some new numbers that John put together that no one has ever seen, showing you the true scope of one of the biggest robberies in recorded human history. Already, the Fed is buying corporate bonds, and it doesn't seem to be ending there. John, how do you see things now? Where do you see them going?
Well, you had the Fed, recently come out with that statement, and I want to quote, but I can't quote the whole quote. Of course, it comes from Tropic Thunder, and it says, "Never go full bleep," and that's what the Fed has done. Yeah, the Fed has done that with that statement. That is just utter insanity to actually say something like that, because that's a total opposite of what the Federal Reserve has done. Over time, of course, inequality has grown because what happens is as they print all this money and bail out their bankster friends, they are giving more and more money to their bankster friends, and their bankster friends sits on money that is deposited at the Federal Reserve, because that's the bank for the banks, the big commercial banks. So they sit there on that money, making a tiny little bit of percentage on that, of course. And on the other side, the slaves are, left with anywhere from 19 to 25% credit cards, or maybe you're lucky, you go to the hard money lenders, and go to one of those money stores, and you take out a loan that's, sometimes up to 1,000,000% annually. So that's, what you get. And I actually wrote about this back in 2016 in my book called Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World. And I called it, actually, Max Kaiser coined it. It was called interest rate apartheid, which is basically what it is. It's, the ultra wealthy, the 0.01%, they could get, zero or negative interest rate on their loans that they borrow against and buy new assets all the time. Meanwhile, on the other side, people get anywhere from 19 to thousands of percent on the money that they borrow on the other side of the spectrum. The 60-80% of people that is there. So they are definitely like creating full-blown inequality by printing more money, because more and more of that money gets stuck on the opposite side, where the people that actually have access to it gets more and more of it, and on the other side, very little people actually are getting access to it. So it's basically, when they did this whole $1,200, that they gave to people in the United States, well, that came out of their own books. That will be taxed back. You got to get that money from somewhere. So the U.S. government borrowed that money, and it wasn't the Fed that created that money per se. It was actually the U.S. Citizen that then borrowed that money through the government, and then they owe back that money that they actually got for free. So nothing is free, of course, and that's the big problem here, because they've been on just a crazy binge. It was a heroin binge before, but they started to do crystal meth and all kind of crazy stuff. Because that's cheaper and cheaper drugs that they got to have, right, to get the same high.
Yeah, people compare the economy to like apples and oranges. No, the U.S. economy is, as I said before, and I've been saying for a while, the toothless crack whore on fentanyl that literally is still somehow miraculously alive, because it's utterly insane. And what you've been saying about these programs and just the small and middle class person being screwed over, this is just the beginning. The Federal Reserve is cheering on more bailouts as Powell is saying, hey guys, stop. We need more relief, as they call it. We need more money just out of nowhere to be, of course, transferred. This has huge ramifications. Peak Prosperity calls it no billionaire left behind, because when you truly look at what they're doing, when you really look at it, you have private businesses like Blackrock having their profits be privatized. They get to keep everything that they win. Everything that they lose, that is socialized, and we pay for that. And this is the top.
And they make a commission on it now.
Exactly. It's utterly insane. You sent me a contract here by BlackRock. What is this that you just sent us here? Because this is important to look at.
Yeah, well, this is actually the agreement that comes with, recent comment that actually calmed the markets was you had, Fed Chair Jerome Powell coming and saying that, oh, we're going to buy some corporate bonds now to calm the markets. That was basically using this, what's called the Exchange Stabilization Fund in the United States, which is run by the U.S. Treasury, which is a fund to manipulate the U.S. dollar so it stays stable. That's basically what it is, the Exchange Stabilization Fund. That's basically says what it means. And so they've used it since 1933, and it was created by confiscated gold, $2 billion back in the day in 1933 through the Gold Act. And so they have had this fund for forever, and they actually intervened in many currencies throughout time. And now, of course, they have I've done a huge report on this way back in the day that actually Josh put up for me that you can find. It's called the Exchange Stabilization Fund. And you could go and look that up in my name, and you'll find an in detail actually where I show content that is supposed to not be leaked out, of course. And they said that, oh, if you leak this out, it'll cost you X amount of money. But it had to come out, and this is the secret. I call it slush fund or war chest that the United States has now that they actually have used, because we're talking about the Fed is buying corporate bonds. Not really. It's actually the U.S. Government again through the Exchange Stabilization Fund. They're utilizing the exchange the Exchange Stabilization Fund as a bank, and then they actually fractionalize it so they can make a bank loan out to these institutions that like BlackRock actually creates these corporations called special purpose vehicles, which is what it says in this whole agreement is how they actually get paid on creating those. And then what they do is they throw in basically toxic assets into these special purpose vehicles. And who knows who's actually buying those, to be honest with you. I'm not 100% who would buy them. But that's how all these banks and how actually Greece got a place in the European Union back in the days, because Goldman Sachs actually helped them create this special purpose vehicle, which is a corporation that they shove toxic assets into, hide it there, and then the balance sheet looks pretty nice. After they actually have done the accounting, which is basically fraudulent, trying to hide massive losses that they had. And so that's what they're currently doing with these special purpose vehicles that BlackRock here you can see, they're making a substantial amount of money, this is the thing. The banks and these funds, they only make money two ways. It's interest payments, that they get in, or it's actually through fees and so on, which is, especially BlackRock is making most of their money through fees that they charge, to their customers that think that they have their money safe with BlackRock in all of their different funds around the world.
Yeah, people would be shocked if they found out how Wall Street actually worked. People would be astonished to see, wait, you could just use money to make money, no services, no goods, no manufacturing, not doing anything for anyone else. It's a huge Ponzi scheme, and they make it so confusing so people don't understand it. But I truly believe, if people understood what was really happening with our economic system, with our financial system, with the U.S. Federal Reserve, I truly do believe there would be a revolution overnight, because you would ask yourself, why are hedge funds and billionaires getting such special treatment? Why are they living under these special rules of communism? Meanwhile, obviously, there is great income inequality. Obviously, that gap is widening. Obviously, the bigger thing that really is worth considering here is that opportunity of individuals to make it for themselves is becoming harder and harder. We've seen the government implement many bad decisions when it comes to locking down, which, of course, we were totally against, because we said the government shouldn't have this much power over you, but truly that's kind of minuscule when you look at the larger effects of playing favorites with billionaires, always bailing them out, not letting the market breathe in fresh air, not allowing new entrepreneurs, and keeping the top at the very top. This is why most revolutions have been fought throughout human history, because the wealth on top is becoming too concentrated. We have that, but we have a lot of frustrated anger and manipulation of protesters to go after maple syrup. Like, to go after these things that are absolutely meaningless in our life. John, you've been pointing a lot of this crazy, incredulous behavior. We haven't talked to you in a while, but what's some of the biggest kind of incredulous behavior you've seen by the banking industry, and how do you see this kind of unfolding as well?
Well, I think we're in for a second wave, and I'm not talking about a second wave of corona. I'm talking about a second wave of volatility, of economic collapse from this. We haven't seen nothing yet, and I actually see it in my daily line of work, where we have some major manufacturers of alarm, for example, of alarm companies that can't manufacture because their plant was shut down in Mexico, and they didn't have the contingency plan, so they only had that plant, and now they're trying to desperately scramble to make stuff over here in Canada. But that's a big problem, and of course their competitor, which it's basically a duopoly. There's only two or three of them now that are really left that are competing, and both of them, two of the biggest ones, was actually using the same plant to manufacture their goods down in Mexico. Yeah, so it's pretty hilarious. But we were seeing, lack of pressure treated wood, for example. Here is there's nothing left. Apparently, for my boss, he owns a building company, and there's zero left of that. So we're starting to see like the implications that they had for all these shutdowns that they made. And of course, let's just talk about, you mentioned at the start, about these numbers that I just put together. It's the numbers of current central bank balance sheets, and I used 86 central banks that actually report numbers in the world. It's G20 plus a whole bunch of other ones. And I actually put together some numbers here that people might find quite mind-boggling, because the central banks are actually, like, since about the little over the beginning of probably September last year, they printed about $7.14 trillion worth of new currency into existence to buy toxic assets that were basically worth nothing, but the central bank gave all that money to the banks. That's most of it sitting on the central bank's balance sheets. On the deposits at the central bank, making the bank's money, all that 7 points. So yeah, let's say that they make 1%. Well, that's a pretty decent return for the banks, through this whole crisis. And not to mention, like, the biggest perpetrators. So people will actually be shocked and appalled here. I'm actually doing this live where I'm going to give you guys a very interesting number, and this is the percentage rise of the balance sheets for these central banks. And actually, the worst perpetrator is not actually, it's Venezuela, of course. But Argentina is not able to keep up anymore. Angola, both of those countries are massive perpetrators of destroying their currencies, so their balance sheets always explode. But they're not the worst ones right now. It's Venezuela, of course, is the worst. They increased their balance sheet since about September, 3,471%. But then Bank of Canada, this is where it's crazy. So we have, like, on TV, the CDIC says that all your money is safe in the bank. That's our former FDIC, the deposit insurance. And then also they say that, the banks are, really solid investments. They pay dividends and so on. Meanwhile, they're bailing the banks out about 200 billion, which is a crazy increase. So the total balance sheet of the Canadian Central Bank has increased basically 10 times less than Venezuela, but it's 342.71%, which is by far beating any other central bank in the world. And we're supposed to be a very strong nation up here, but it's all based on fluff and basically insolvent banks that they're going to bail out. Then, of course, the Fed is next with 77.83% increase, and then Finland is 77.66%, and Argentina, unfortunately, can't keep up here anymore, and they're 61.85% increase. But that increase is basically these central banks, they're actually buying up these toxic assets from the banks and then giving them free cash back. And of course, the worst perpetrators are, the Fed itself. The ECB has also the Fed has printed 3.113 trillion. The ECB has printed 1 trillion. Bank of Japan 782. Now we're talking about US dollars, 782 billion. Italy 311, Canada 289, France and 278, and so on and so on and so on. But this just shows you how much they actually have had to increase their balance sheets, which is if you go and look at this charts, you can actually find them on my website, which is theeconomictruth.org, and you can actually go and look at the Bank of Canada and Federal Reserve balance sheets and see what they're doing currently. And you will actually see that both of those charts of the balance sheets of those two central banks are quite baffling, but nothing quite beats Canada. It looks actually worse than almost Venezuela right now. And I don't think we're in for anything safe here in Canada. Meanwhile, everybody's around protesting or taking down statues, trying to erase history. Meanwhile, history is being made right underneath their feet, and their wealth is being stolen for decades to go ahead here.
Yeah, I think you brought up a very important point, because if you really want to wake up to the true realities of this world, if you really want to be, quote, red-pilled or woke, look at history. You'll be shocked to see what has been happening throughout history, what is the norm throughout history. And during these difficult times, a lot of people keep telling themselves, well, it's going to get better soon, anytime, everything's going to be fine. When you look at the actions of the Federal Reserve here in the United States, when you look at the actions of the international bankers in other countries, especially like you mentioned in Canada, you have a horrible, horrible situation that's only making the rich richer, creating more inequality, creating more social unrest because of the less opportunities for anyone to have any success in this existence. And again, you wrote a very interesting article, and I kind of wanted to segue this into the next question. You wrote an article that was titled "How the Fed Will Own Everything and Own Nothing." That's a very good pointed title. We may make that title make that the title of this video. But moving forward, a lot of people are talking about how the dollar is going to flounder. The dollar is going to possibly collapse or even potentially stay stronger. How do you see things kind of unfolding from here?
Well, I think we're not going to see the United States per se being hit first. Because it's still the world reserve currency, and it's nothing yet that could actually keep up with the United States as a global tradable currency. So that is not gonna happen first, but it will happen eventually, where the United States dollar goes bust, because it's getting to a point where it's getting pretty crazy over there. But of course, financial wise, everybody's running to safety in the U.S. dollar right now. So the U.S. dollar is quite strong. But at one point, and this is what happened pre-2008, is that you saw people, running into from 2006 to 2008, everybody was running into the dollar. The dollar becomes super strong, and then suddenly everybody needed to exit somewhere, and there was nobody to sell it to, because nobody wanted to buy at that peak. And then you just got to find a floor on the price of those stocks that people are holding. And of course, and the other crazy thing is that you're having these kids, at high schools and everywhere, they're on Robinhood. And recently there was a poor young kid, he actually committed suicide because he had gotten into what's called margin debt, which is basically you borrow against your portfolio. 780 million, $1,000 that he got into. A young kid, I think it was 18 years old. And these kids, they finally managed to lure the sheep in, and I was surprised that they managed to lure the millennials into the stock market. But of course, it was Robinhood. And what's the funniest about Robinhood? It sounds like it's great. It's stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. You know what Robinhood app actually does? Robinhood app takes all the trades of its people, and then it sells it right away to a high-frequency trading company that then front runs and steals all that money from those people. So It's a very Orwellian, these names that they like to put on things, but basically, the sheep are into the market again, and we might see a bigger run up here for a little while until the big crash comes. Because where are people going to run? There's nowhere to run to. Well, they're going to probably run to say as some kind of safety throughout history, and that's precious metals like gold and silver. And of course, cryptocurrencies now that are tradable and being protected by a set amount of supply on some of them. So those will be more successful at surviving than a lot of these fiat currencies. Because if we keep on having these fiat currencies and you're going to keep on having stagnant wages, meanwhile you're printing all this money and giving it to the rich people. And slowly inflation are increasing, and you're not increasing your salary. You're gonna be at the point where they are in the Yellow Vest movement, where a lot of people said that they're out there because they can't afford food on the table because of a lack of increase. The problem is that the wages was stagnant, and then of course inflation has been going rampant, and they're not really measuring it. We could go into for hours how they actually are manipulating those numbers, but they're lying left, right, and center. The central bankers, everybody, I think they're scared, really, really scared of what they've created and what they really have done. Because me and Tim, of course, so many times we've gone into the criminal behavior of what the Federal Reserve, the Ponzi scheme that they created on such an epic proportion. Because now they have a global. We never, ever, ever in history have had something that was globally like this. It was usually one country that jumped off a gold standard or something and then hyperinflated and destroyed their currency. That's usually what happened. But now we have it on a global scale, and it's happening, left, right, and center all across the world, where you're seeing prices here in Canada have increased substantially. And if people are not having increases in their incomes or whatever it is, and especially businesses that are running on 25 to maybe 75% of their actual income, and then they had a bad bottom line, a margin of maybe like 5% or something usually, and they're indebted up to their teeth. No amount of money is going to save this massive bubble that they've created, and it's all the Federal Reserve's fault. It's all these academics that are trying to say that they're trying to fix inequality right now. That's another statement that we didn't talk about, but they were recently talking about how they're, really working hard to fix inequality. They're the biggest perpetrators and the biggest financial terrorists out there, indebting people, making them poor. And, people are dying because of the Federal Reserve. And nobody's talking about it, but everybody's talking about the virus. What about all the economic suicides of people that have gone broke, and that poor little boy that killed himself because he ended up in all that debt because he was played by the terrorism that these banks have put up when they financialized markets. They've been terrorizing people for decades now with this system that is on the teetering of faulting, because it should have fell in 2008. They printed a whole bunch of money. They're going to print as much as they can again, but people are just going to get hungrier and hungrier and madder at them. And one point is just going to be a breaking point soon. I just can't see how they're going to get past it for too much longer, because they can't keep on pushing this envelope and thinking that with eradicating everybody's purchasing power, that they're gonna fix inequality. It's utterly moronic and stupid to think that.
Yeah, bailing out the billionaires is not going to solve inequality. And again, this is why people need to understand here. This is why we get censored for messages like this. Meanwhile, other quote protest woke messages get promoted by the mainstream media, promoted by all the corporations. The reason why when you hit right on the center, you become a target. There's a statement that I was remembering when you were talking about the U.S. stock market, specifically Robinhood, and it's someone recently saying that the U.S. stock market is the new Bitcoin. And when you look at the U.S. stock market, holy cow! I mean, it's just absolutely crazy.
All the kids are in that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, it makes no sense. And of course, there's been a big push to push people into Robinhood. There's people saying you could get rich really quickly. Look, we have a kangaroo market going up and down, and people don't understand the true realities. We got the article here pulled up of the 20-year-old that committed suicide because of the $730,000 negative balance sheet. Absolutely insane. So thank you, John, for explaining to us everything that's happening with Robinhood. I know a lot of people who are trying to take advantage of the situation, that are trying to make a quick buck on there, but they should know the true reality of it. We got into a lot. Anything else you want to say about this specific topic, and where can people find more of your work?
I don't know even what to say anymore. It's just like I feel like we live in a alternate reality where basically money printing is the game, and these central bankers, they're just going to keep on printing money, and it comes back to a 2002 speech from Ben Bernanke where he said that the printing presses will always beat deflationary pressures, and that's what they're doing right now. They're just creating insane amounts of new currency and giving it for free to the banks, and they're just furthering inequality. They're just it's a totally broken system, and it can't be fixed. Don't even try to fix it. It's got to reset, and I just hope it happens sooner than later, because if it don't, it's going to get so much worse. I just don't want that for people. Humanity needs to get out of this rut that we gotten ourselves into by financializing our world, because every time that happens, and it happened back in the French Revolution, where they started to financialize things, and same thing happened back then. That was pre-French Revolution, by the way. And of course, I think that's where we're heading towards. And of course, media and everybody is just jumping on the bandwagon, pushing divide and conquer. So I don't see anything positive per se in the very near future, but I do hope that this reset will not end up in another economic system by these financial terrorists that are probably going to be cashless or something like that. So please educate yourself and resist the temptation to get into these systems when they come up, because they're just going to be worse enslavement grids for people. And so we need to educate ourselves and start using alternate ways of mediums of exchange around the world. And we need to leave this whole government run Ponzi mafia system that has been built up, and it's time to free yourselves, people. And there's many ways that you could do that by financially educating yourself and starting to understand what kind of alternatives are out there. And you can find a lot of that, of course, at my website, theeconomictruth.org. And there you can find books, reports, tons of content that I created through the years that you probably like, and that I try to educate people in a more easier manner than a lot of other economists that talk a lot of technical language that are very hard for people to understand. So I really tried to put it as easy as possible, so the general population, because they are the ones that are getting hurt, that really needs this message the most.
You're getting screwed. They're hurting you. They're creating massive economic inequality. I'm trying to dumb it down. You've done a great job, John. Thank you so much for providing a lot of information. Always great to have you on. The link to, of course, your website will be down below. And if you guys appreciated this video, you found it helpful, you found it useful, share it with your friends and family members. It is more important than ever. Again, because we send out these kind of messages, because we talk about what we talk about, we are targeted, we are attacked. The only thing still keeping us here is you and your voice, and clicking that share button with your friends and family members. There's a reason some voices are promoted and some voices are censored. And again, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, and that's why I love you guys. Stay tuned for more here on wearechange.org.